Ma'am, if that car belongs to you, prove it before I put you in cuffs. The words cracked through the underground parking garage like a gunshot, sharp enough to stop footsteps 40 feet away. Judge Vanessa Cole slowly turned her head toward the voice, one hand still gripping the heavy cardboard archive box against her chest. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered softly, washing the concrete walls in a pale gray glow that made everyone look colder than they really were. Rainwater dripped from the hem of Vanessa's charcoal coat, forming small dark circles on the pavement beneath her polished black heels. It was nearly 11:30 p.m., and the federal courthouse garage was almost empty except for a few security officers changing shifts and a pair of janitors pushing cleaning carts toward the elevators. Vanessa had spent 14 straight hours inside courtroom 7B reviewing emergency injunction filings tied to a corruption case that had already made national headlines. Her shoulders ached. Her fingers were stiff from arthritis. All she wanted was to load the final box into her Lexus and drive home to the quiet townhouse waiting for her across the river in Alexandria. But now a bright flashlight beam burned directly into her face. Officer Ryan Keller stood 15 feet away beside his patrol SUV, one hand resting near his belt, the other holding the flashlight steady. Young. Broad shoulders. White male, maybe early 30s. Rain speckled the front of his navy uniform, and impatience sat on his face like something permanent. He glanced from Vanessa to the Lexus, then back to Vanessa again, his expression tightening with every second. "I asked you a question," he said. "Step away from the vehicle." Vanessa blinked against the light. "Officer, this is my car." Keller let out a quiet laugh under his breath, humorless and short. Uh-huh. The parking garage fell strangely silent after that. Even the rolling squeak from the janitor's cart faded into the distance. Vanessa carefully lowered the archive box onto the trunk ledge and reached slowly toward her leather handbag hanging from her shoulder. "My courthouse credentials are inside my purse," she said calmly. "I can show you, don't reach in there." His voice rose instantly. Hard. Commanding. The flashlight beam jerked downward toward her hands. Vanessa froze. A cold draft drifted through the concrete structure as headlights from a passing street above flashed briefly through the garage entrance. Somewhere nearby, a police radio crackled with static. Keller took 2 quick steps closer now, eyes narrowing as he studied her face, her clothes, the car, the expensive federal parking decal on the windshield. Something about the scene clearly didn't fit the story he had already decided was true. Vanessa could see it happening in real time behind his eyes. A black woman. Alone. Late at night. Standing beside a luxury vehicle. To him, the conclusion had already been written. "You people always say the same thing," Keller muttered quietly, almost to himself. Vanessa stared at him for a moment. Not angry. Not afraid. Just tired in a way that settled deep behind the eyes. Water dripped steadily from the ceiling pipes overhead. "Officer," she said softly, "I strongly suggest you call your supervisor before this escalates any further." Keller's jaw flexed. The sentence clearly irritated him more than it warned him. He stepped closer again until only a few feet separated them. The red recording light on his body camera blinked steadily against the darkness between them, small and silent like a heartbeat nobody noticed yet. Vanessa glanced at it once, then back at him. Around them, the garage remained frozen, as if even the concrete itself understood that something irreversible had just begun. Vanessa Cole had spent most of her life learning how to remain calm in rooms designed to test her patience. Courtrooms. Senate hearings. Closed-door negotiations where powerful men smiled politely while questioning whether she belonged at the table at all. 27 years in federal law had taught her that dignity was often quieter than anger. Still, standing beneath the cold fluorescent lights of the parking garage with rainwater soaking through the sleeves of her coat, she felt something heavier than irritation settling into her chest. Disappointment. Not surprise. Never surprise anymore. Officer Ryan Keller circled slowly toward the front of the Lexus, his boots echoing sharply across the concrete floor. The flashlight beams swept over the license plate, the courthouse parking permit, the leather briefcase resting in the back seat. He stopped beside the driver's side door and folded one arm across his chest. "You know what usually happens here?" he asked. Vanessa remained still beside the trunk. "People panic when they get caught." His eyes stayed fixed on her face as if waiting for fear to appear. "Especially when they think throwing around official-sounding words is going to scare me." Vanessa inhaled slowly through her nose. Somewhere overhead, thunder rolled faintly across the Washington sky. "I am not trying to scare you, Officer Keller," she said. "I am trying to help you avoid making a serious error." Keller smirked at that. Not amused. Annoyed. The kind of expression that appeared when authority felt challenged in front of an audience. One of the courthouse security guards near the elevator had stopped pretending not to watch. A young intern holding a coffee tray stood frozen beside the stairwell entrance, eyes moving nervously between the officer and Vanessa. Keller noticed them too. That seemed to harden something inside him. "You people always become lawyers the second a patrol car shows up," he muttered. Vanessa heard the sentence clearly this time. So did the security guard. The air changed immediately afterward, heavy and uncomfortable, like a room where somebody had shattered glass but nobody wanted to acknowledge the sound. Vanessa looked directly at him now, calm but firm. "Officer, I would like your badge number." Keller laughed once under his breath and took another step closer. "No," he replied. "What you need to do is keep your hands visible." Rain drifted through the open side of the garage in soft misty waves, carrying the smell of wet pavement and engine oil through the structure. Vanessa's fingers ached from gripping the archive box earlier. The joints in her right hand had started throbbing nearly an hour ago during closing arguments in court, but she had ignored it like always. Ignore the pain. Finish the work. Keep moving. That had been her rhythm for decades. She glanced briefly toward the scattered folders still sitting near the trunk opening. Inside those boxes were sealed federal records tied to a bribery investigation involving a defense contractor and 2 state officials. Sensitive documents. Confidential witness transcripts. Evidence that had taken months to organize. Keller followed her gaze and immediately misread it. "Do not even think about getting back in that car," he snapped. Vanessa closed her eyes for half a second before answering. "Officer Keller, those files are protected federal materials." "Funny," he replied, "because right now you look more concerned about papers than explaining why you are standing next to a car registered to somebody else." Vanessa slowly turned her head toward him again. For the first time since this began, genuine disbelief flickered across her face. "Registered to somebody else?" she repeated quietly. Keller pulled a small notepad from his pocket and glanced down at it. "Vehicle is registered to A.V. Cole." He looked back up. "Unless that suddenly rings a bell." The young intern near the stairwell blinked hard, realization beginning to spread across his face like sunrise breaking through clouds. Vanessa watched him notice the truth seconds before Keller did not. The red body camera light continued blinking steadily against the officer's chest while the rain whispered softly through the dark concrete garage, recording every word either of them would later be able to take back. The young intern standing near the stairwell tightened his grip on the cardboard coffee tray so hard that the lid on one cup popped loose, spilling dark coffee across his hand without him even noticing. His eyes stayed fixed on Vanessa Cole. Then on the silver courthouse parking decal. Then back to Officer Ryan Keller. It was the look of someone realizing they were watching a disaster happen in slow motion. "Officer," the intern said carefully, his voice thin with hesitation. "I think maybe you should just let her explain. Nobody asked you." Keller snapped immediately without turning around. The intern fell silent. Vanessa watched the exchange quietly. Rain tapped softly against the concrete entrance ramp leading down into the garage, and somewhere farther back, an elevator bell chimed before the doors slid open with a metallic sigh. 2 courthouse employees stepped out mid-conversation, then slowed when they saw the patrol SUV lights flashing across the walls. Keller straightened slightly, aware now that more people were watching. His posture changed in subtle ways Vanessa had seen many times before in courtrooms. pride settling in where judgment should have been. The dangerous instinct to double down rather than reconsider. "Place your hands where I can see them," Keller ordered again. Vanessa slowly lifted both hands away from her sides, palms visible. Her wedding ring caught the overhead light for half a second before the reflection disappeared again. "I am cooperating with you," she said evenly. "But I am also telling you this situation is being handled improperly." Keller stepped closer. "Funny thing about criminals," he replied. "They always think they know procedure better than police officers." Vanessa held his stare for a moment. "And good officers usually know the difference between caution and assumption." The sentence landed harder than shouting would have. Keller's jaw tightened instantly. The body camera on his chest blinked red beneath the rain droplets collecting on his uniform. One flash. Then another. Recording everything. The security guard near the elevators shifted uncomfortably. He was an older black man named Leonard who had worked courthouse security nearly 15 years. Vanessa recognized him immediately even though they had never spoken more than polite greetings in passing. Leonard looked like he wanted to intervene, but fear held him in place. Federal buildings had rules. Local police had authority. And everybody understood how quickly stepping into the wrong moment could cost somebody a paycheck. Keller pulled a small flashlight from his belt and aimed it directly into the back seat of the Lexus again. Legal binders. Court files. A folded judicial robe hanging neatly beside the rear passenger door. He frowned slightly at that, confusion flickering across his face for the first time. Vanessa noticed it. So did Leonard. But instead of slowing down, Keller seemed irritated by the doubt creeping into his own thinking. "Whose robe is that?" he demanded. Vanessa answered immediately. "Mine." Keller looked at her, then laughed once. Short. Sharp. Disbelieving. "Right." The intern near the stairwell finally spoke again before he could stop himself. "Sir, I think she really does work here." Keller turned toward him so quickly the young man nearly stumbled backward. "Do you want to explain to Internal Affairs why you interfered with an active investigation tonight?" Silence crushed the garage again. The intern looked down immediately. Vanessa could almost feel the shame radiating off him for backing away, but she did not blame him. Fear had a way of shrinking good people into quiet versions of themselves. Keller took out a pair of handcuffs from his duty belt, metal glinting beneath the fluorescent lights. Several people nearby visibly stiffened. Vanessa's expression did not change, but something old and weary passed behind her eyes. Not panic. Recognition. The painful understanding that once certain assumptions took root inside someone determined to hold power, facts often arrived too late. "Officer Keller," she said softly, "before you make another decision tonight, I want you to think very carefully about why you believed I could not possibly own this car." Keller stared at her in silence for one long second while rain whispered through the open garage entrance, and the red light on his body camera continued blinking steadily in the dark. For a moment, Officer Ryan Keller said nothing. The only sound inside the garage was the faint hiss of rain blowing through the entrance ramp and the low electrical buzz from the fluorescent lights overhead. Vanessa Cole stood perfectly still with her hands visible, her breathing calm despite the growing tension wrapping itself around the concrete structure like wire pulled too tight. Keller looked at her face, then at the Lexus again, then back at the silver courthouse decal on the windshield. Doubt was there now. Small. Unwelcome. But instead of letting it slow him down, it seemed to irritate him even more. "Turn around," he said finally. Leonard, the courthouse security guard, took an involuntary step forward. "Officer," he said carefully, "maybe we should call building administration first. I think there has been some kind of misunderstanding here." Keller did not even look at him. "Stay out of this." Leonard stopped immediately, lips pressing into a thin line. Vanessa noticed the disappointment in his eyes, not toward her, but toward the situation itself. Toward the familiar shape of it. Keller moved closer until he stood only inches away from Vanessa now. Rainwater clung to the shoulders of his uniform while the body camera continued blinking red against his chest. Place your hands behind your back, he ordered. The young intern near the stairwell looked visibly pale. One of the courthouse employees quietly pulled out a phone, holding it low against his coat as if unsure whether recording was bravery or danger. Vanessa slowly lowered her eyes for a brief second. Not in submission. In exhaustion. She had seen careers destroyed over smaller moments than this. Reputations cracked open by ego and impatience. Entire lives altered because somebody with authority could not bear the humiliation of admitting they were wrong. She gently placed her purse on the wet concrete beside the car. "Officer Keller," she said softly, "you still have time to stop this. Hands behind your back." His voice came sharper now, louder for the growing audience. Vanessa obeyed without resistance. The cold metal clicked around her wrists beneath the fluorescent lights, the sound echoing farther than it should have in the empty garage. A visible shock passed through several people watching nearby. The intern whispered something under his breath that nobody could fully hear. Leonard rubbed one hand across his forehead slowly like a man developing a headache in real time. Keller guided Vanessa a few steps away from the Lexus while rain drifted sideways through the garage opening behind them. One of the archive boxes tipped from the edge of the trunk and hit the pavement. Legal folders spilled across the wet concrete floor, pages sliding beneath parked cars and soaking through almost instantly. Vanessa instinctively turned her head toward them. "Please be careful with those documents," she said quietly. "Those are sealed federal records." Keller shook his head in disbelief. "You really commit to the act, do not you?" Vanessa closed her eyes briefly. The sentence hurt more than the cuffs. Not because of the insult itself, but because of how casually it had been delivered. As though competence, authority, and dignity could only belong to certain people in certain bodies. One courthouse employee suddenly stepped forward from near the elevators, staring hard at Vanessa's face. Middle-aged white woman. Navy blazer. Court administration badge clipped at her waist. Her expression changed instantly the closer she got. "Oh my God!" she whispered. Keller turned toward her. "Ma'am, stay back." But the woman was no longer looking at him. She was staring directly at Vanessa now, horror spreading across her face like color draining from glass. "Judge Cole?" she breathed. Silence crashed through the garage. Even the rain seemed quieter for a second. Keller froze where he stood, one hand still resting near Vanessa's arm. The blinking red light on his body camera reflected faintly against the polished hood of the Lexus while several people nearby exchanged stunned looks without speaking. Vanessa slowly lifted her eyes toward the woman from court administration. Her voice, when it came, was calm enough to make the moment somehow worse. "Good evening, Marianne." The color drained from Officer Ryan Keller's face so fast it almost looked physical. One second he stood rigid beneath the flashing patrol lights with his hand near the cuffs around Vanessa Cole's wrists, and the next he looked like a man whose body had suddenly forgotten how to breathe. Marianne took another cautious step forward in her navy blazer, eyes wide with disbelief. "Judge Cole," she repeated, quieter this time, as though saying the name too loudly might somehow make this situation even more real. Vanessa gave a small nod. Rainwater slid from the edge of her coat sleeve and dripped softly onto the concrete floor below. Around them, nobody moved. The young intern near the stairwell stared. Openly now, no longer pretending not to understand what was happening. Leonard lowered his eyes briefly and exhaled through his nose like a man carrying second-hand shame. Keller swallowed hard. "You know her?" he asked Marianne, though his voice no longer carried the same confidence as before. Marianne blinked at him in stunned silence for a moment. "Know her?" she said. "Officer, she is Judge Vanessa Cole. United States Federal Court." The sentence seemed to hit the garage walls and bounce back heavier every time it echoed through someone's mind. Keller looked at Vanessa again, really looked this time. The rain-speckled coat. The judicial robe hanging in the back seat. The courthouse decal. The calm voice that had never once risen despite everything. All the details he had dismissed were suddenly rearranging themselves into something undeniable. The body camera on his chest continued blinking red without mercy. Vanessa stood quietly with her hands restrained behind her back, shoulders straight despite the discomfort pressing into her wrists. Her expression did not hold triumph. That somehow made the moment worse for everyone watching. Keller stepped backward half a pace. "Why did you not just identify yourself?" he asked, almost defensively. Marianne stared at him in disbelief before Vanessa could even answer. "She tried," Leonard said quietly from near the elevators. The garage fell silent again. Keller looked toward Leonard sharply, but the older man did not back down this time. "I heard her," Leonard continued. "She told you her credentials were in her purse." Keller's mouth opened slightly, then closed again. The truth was no longer arriving piece by piece. It was collapsing on top of him, all at once. One of the courthouse employees nearby slowly lowered the phone they had been recording with, while another turned away completely, rubbing both hands over their face. The air inside the garage suddenly felt smaller, tighter, harder to stand inside. Vanessa shifted her weight slightly as pain pulsed through her wrists. The metal cuffs were pressing awkwardly against joints already swollen from long hours in court. Keller noticed the movement immediately. His eyes dropped to the restraints, then quickly away again. "I was following procedure," he muttered, though the sentence sounded weak even to him. Vanessa looked at him steadily. "No," she said softly. "You were following an assumption." The words landed with no anger behind them. Just truth. Clean and sharp. Somewhere above the garage, thunder rolled again through the Washington night. Marianne finally stepped closer toward Vanessa, her face pale with concern. "Judge Cole, are you all right?" Vanessa answered after a brief pause. "I will be." Keller reached awkwardly toward the handcuffs now, his movements suddenly uncertain. His fingers trembled slightly as he searched for the key attached to his belt. The same hands that had moved with confidence minutes earlier now struggled against simple metal. The red light on the body camera blinked steadily inches from his chest, capturing every second of his unraveling. Vanessa glanced at it once, then toward the soaked legal documents scattered across the garage floor. Pages of sealed federal testimony rested in shallow rainwater beneath fluorescent lights that buzzed softly overhead. Years of work. Evidence tied to a major corruption case. Reduced to wet paper because one man could not imagine a black woman belonging beside a federal courthouse at midnight. Keller finally freed one wrist, then the other. The cuffs came away with a hollow metallic sound that seemed far louder than before. Vanessa slowly brought her hands forward, gently rubbing one wrist with the other. No anger. No outburst. Just quiet dignity standing beneath cold garage lights while everyone around her struggled to live with what they had just witnessed. Nobody spoke for several seconds after the handcuffs came off. The silence inside the garage no longer felt tense. It felt heavy. Embarrassed. Like the entire concrete structure itself wanted to look away from what had just happened beneath its flickering fluorescent lights. Vanessa Cole flexed her fingers carefully, trying to ease the ache spreading through her wrists. Thin red marks circled both of them beneath the sleeve of her rain-soaked coat. She lowered her hands slowly and bent to retrieve one of the federal folders lying near her feet. The bottom edge of the file was soaked through with dirty rainwater, ink beginning to blur across the corner of the page. She stared at it quietly for a moment before closing the folder against her chest. Officer Ryan Keller remained frozen near the patrol SUV. His face looked pale beneath the harsh white lighting overhead. He glanced once toward the courthouse employees standing nearby, then quickly away again when nobody met his eyes. The confidence that had filled his voice earlier was completely gone now, replaced by something far smaller and far more dangerous. Shame. Leonard finally walked forward carrying several scattered folders he had gathered from beneath a parked sedan. He handed them gently to Vanessa without saying a word. She accepted them with a small nod of gratitude. Marianne stood beside her now, still visibly shaken. "Judge Cole," she said softly, "we should get you upstairs. We can call medical if your wrists are hurting." Vanessa looked down briefly at the marks on her skin. "I am all right," she answered. But the truth sat quietly in her posture. The exhaustion in her shoulders. the way her fingers trembled slightly while reorganizing the damaged files. She was tired in a way sleep could not fix. Rain drifted through the open side of the garage again, carrying cold air across the concrete floor. One of the soaked pages slipped free from a folder and skidded several feet away beneath the fluorescent glow. Keller instinctively stepped toward it before stopping halfway there. Vanessa noticed the movement. So did he. The body camera attached to his chest still blinked red. Still recording. Every hesitation. Every silence. Every face in the room pretending not to understand how quickly authority could become humiliation when mixed with prejudice and pride. Keller swallowed hard before finally speaking. "Judge Cole." His voice cracked slightly on her name. Vanessa turned toward him calmly. He looked younger suddenly. Smaller somehow. Like the uniform had stopped protecting him from himself. "I did not know," he said quietly. The words hung in the air for a moment before Vanessa answered. "That is the problem, Officer Keller." Her tone remained even. No anger. No cruelty. Which somehow cut deeper than either would have. Keller lowered his eyes. Somewhere above them, thunder rolled again across the city while the garage lights hummed softly overhead. The intern near the stairwell finally set down his untouched coffee tray on a bench beside the elevators. The paper cups had gone cold long ago. Nobody had noticed. Vanessa crouched carefully despite the stiffness in her knees and picked up another rain-damaged document from the floor. Keller watched her do it. Watched a federal judge gather soaked legal files with her own hands minutes after being restrained in her own courthouse parking garage. Something about that image seemed to break whatever remained of his certainty. "Let me help you," he said suddenly, stepping forward. Vanessa paused for a second before handing him a folder silently. Keller accepted it with both hands. Rainwater dripped from the edge of the papers onto his sleeves while he stared down at the federal seal stamped across the cover page. The same documents he had treated like props in a lie now rested carefully in his grip. Leonard looked away toward the garage entrance, jaw tightening slightly. Marian folded her arms across her chest as though trying to hold herself together against the cold. The red light on the body camera reflected faintly in the wet pavement beneath Keller's boots while the quiet sound of rain filled the spaces between everyone's thoughts. No sirens. No shouting. Just the unbearable stillness that comes after a terrible mistake has finally been forced into the light. By the next morning, the video had already spread beyond Washington. What began as 38 minutes of body camera footage inside a rain-soaked courthouse garage was now playing across television screens, courthouse lobbies, airport terminals, and millions of phones held silently in stunned hands across the country. The footage was impossible to watch without feeling the weight of it. The calm voice. The soaked federal documents scattered across concrete. The handcuffs. The assumptions. Every second captured in brutal clarity beneath fluorescent lights and falling rain. Inside Metropolitan Police Headquarters, the atmosphere had turned cold long before sunrise. Officers who usually joked through morning briefings now sat quietly staring at screens mounted along the walls. Nobody spoke much. The footage did all the talking. Officer Ryan Keller sat alone in a small administrative office on the 4th floor, still wearing the same wrinkled uniform from the night before. He had not slept. The untouched coffee beside him had gone completely cold hours earlier. Across the desk sat Lieutenant Howard Briggs, a man with silver hair and 30 years inside the department. He watched the paused bodycam footage on a tablet without blinking. Vanessa Cole stood frozen on the screen with rainwater dripping from her coat, while Keller's own voice filled the silent office. "You people always say the same thing." Briggs slowly lowered the volume. "Do you understand what you said there?" Keller rubbed both hands over his face hard enough to leave red marks across his skin. "I was trying to control the situation." Briggs stared at him for several seconds before answering. "No. You were trying to control your embarrassment." The sentence landed heavily in the room. Outside the office window, gray morning rain streaked down the glass in long crooked lines. Keller leaned back in the chair slowly, looking smaller than he had the night before. "I thought she was lying," he admitted quietly. Briggs nodded once. That is becoming very clear. Downtown, news vans crowded the sidewalk outside the federal courthouse while reporters repeated the same clips again and again beneath umbrellas and camera lights. Civil rights attorneys called the footage disturbing. Former judges described it as humiliating. Social media exploded with outrage not only because of what happened, but because Vanessa Cole had remained composed through all of it. No yelling. No threats. No resistance. Just dignity standing still while authority collapsed around her. Inside her chambers on the 12th floor, Vanessa sat quietly beside the tall windows overlooking Constitution Avenue. Morning light pushed weakly through the clouds while a heating vent hummed softly near the bookshelf behind her desk. Her judicial robe hung neatly beside the door. The red marks around her wrists had darkened overnight. Marianne placed a fresh cup of tea carefully beside her without speaking. Vanessa gave a small grateful nod. On the muted television mounted across the room, Keller's Bodycam footage replayed again. The sound was off now, but the silence somehow made it worse. The image froze briefly on the moment the cuffs were removed. Keller staring downward. Vanessa rubbing her wrists calmly beneath fluorescent lights. Marianne folded her arms tightly. "The department called twice already," she said quietly. "They want to issue a formal apology." Vanessa looked toward the rain outside the window instead of the television. "An apology is easy," she answered softly. "Understanding is harder." Marianne said nothing after that. Across the city, Keller's name continued spreading through headlines and online comments faster than he could comprehend. Administrative leave. Internal investigation. Civil rights review. Every hour seemed to tighten the walls around his career a little more. Yet none of it followed him as relentlessly as the final image captured on his own body camera. Not the handcuffs. Not the confrontation. But the moment afterward. The moment Vanessa Cole handed him a rain-soaked federal file without anger in her eyes while he stood there drowning in the realization that the person he had reduced to suspicion had carried more restraint, dignity, and discipline in one painful night than he had managed to show with an entire badge on his chest. 5 days later, the city was still talking about the footage. Restaurants played it silently above crowded bars. Airport televisions replayed the rain-soaked garage scene beside headlines about misconduct and racial profiling. Radio hosts debated it during morning commutes while legal analysts dissected every second of Officer Ryan Keller's body camera recording frame by frame. But inside Courtroom 7B, life continued moving with the quiet precision Vanessa Cole had built her entire career around. The courtroom smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper as attorneys shuffled documents beneath soft overhead lighting. Vanessa sat high above them in her black judicial robe, posture straight despite the lingering soreness in her wrists. Nothing in her expression suggested she had become the center of a national controversy overnight. She reviewed motions, asked questions calmly, ruled on objections with the same measured voice she had always used. Yet everyone in the room seemed to watch her differently now. Not because she had changed, but because they finally understood something they should have recognized long before that garage ever existed. Near noon, Marianne entered chambers carrying a thick folder stamped with city letterhead. She closed the office door quietly behind her. Vanessa looked up from the documents spread across her desk. "Settlement proposal?" she asked. Marianne nodded once. $675,000, she said softly. "The city wants to avoid a prolonged civil rights lawsuit." Vanessa leaned back slightly in her chair. Through the tall chamber windows, sunlight finally pushed through after nearly a week of rain, casting pale gold reflections across the bookshelf behind her. "And Officer Keller?" Marianne hesitated. "Administrative Review Board recommended termination this morning." Silence settled gently between them. Vanessa lowered her eyes to the folder without opening it. Marianne studied her carefully. "Most people expected you to go after them harder than this," she admitted quietly. "Some still want you to." Vanessa rested one hand lightly against the settlement documents. "Punishment is not the same thing as progress," she said. Marianne exhaled slowly. "You really are going to settle?" Vanessa gave a small nod. I spent my entire career inside courtrooms watching people confuse revenge with justice. She looked toward the window again where sunlight reflected off distant government buildings across the city. I am not interested in destroying a man. I am interested in making sure this never feels normal again. Later that evening, nearly everyone had left the courthouse except for a few cleaning crews and overnight clerks. The marble hallways echoed softly beneath dimmed lights while the city outside settled into quiet traffic and distant sirens. Vanessa stepped out of her chambers carrying a single leather briefcase when she noticed someone standing near the elevators. Ryan Keller. Out of uniform. Dark coat. Hands clasped tightly in front of him like he was unsure what to do with them anymore. He looked exhausted. Older somehow than he had 1 week earlier. When he saw her approaching, he straightened immediately. Judge Cole, he said quietly. Vanessa stopped several feet away beneath the soft hallway lights. For a second neither spoke. Keller glanced down briefly before forcing himself to meet her eyes again. I know there is nothing I can say that fixes what happened, he began. But I needed to tell you that I was wrong. His voice shook slightly on the final word. Vanessa listened without interrupting. Keller swallowed hard. I watched that footage over and over, he admitted. And every time I keep asking myself the same question. He paused. Why did I decide you did not belong there before you even spoke? The honesty in the question hung heavily between them. Vanessa studied him quietly for several seconds before answering. Because somewhere along the way, she said softly, you stopped seeing people and started seeing assumptions. Keller lowered his eyes again. The fluorescent lights reflected faintly across the polished courthouse floor while distant elevator cables hummed behind the walls. Vanessa adjusted the briefcase gently in her hand. The dangerous part is not that you made a mistake, she continued. The dangerous part is how certain you were while making it. Keller nodded slowly, shame settling visibly across his face. Vanessa looked at him one last time before stepping toward the elevator. I hope you learned from this, Officer Keller, she said calmly. Because power without humility eventually humiliates everyone. The elevator doors opened softly behind her, and for the first time since that night in the garage, Ryan Keller had no response at all. 3 months later, the rain finally returned to Washington. Soft at first. Then steady enough to paint the courthouse windows silver by late afternoon. Inside Federal Courtroom 7B, the final case of the day had just ended. Lawyers packed briefcases quietly while clerks gathered files beneath the warm amber glow of the overhead lights. Vanessa Cole removed her reading glasses slowly and closed the last folder on her desk with careful hands. The faint marks around her wrists had faded weeks ago, but some things left deeper impressions than skin could hold. Outside her chambers, the marble hallways carried the distant echo of footsteps and elevator bells while cleaning crews moved silently through the building with rolling carts and folded mops. Life had returned to normal in the way institutions often pretend to after surviving embarrassment. Yet something inside the courthouse had changed. Security officers greeted staff more carefully now. Complaints that once disappeared quietly were documented properly. New bias training sessions filled conference rooms every Thursday morning. Nobody said her name out loud when discussing the changes, but everybody knew why they existed. The city settlement had officially closed the legal case weeks earlier. $675,000 transferred with signatures, statements, and carefully worded press conferences. The headlines eventually moved on to newer scandals and louder disasters. They always did. But certain images remained impossible to erase completely. A black federal judge standing beneath fluorescent garage lights with rainwater dripping from her coat. A body camera blinking red while assumptions collapsed in real time. And a silence afterward so heavy it forced people to confront parts of themselves they usually kept hidden. Vanessa stepped out into the hallway carrying her leather briefcase as courthouse employees offered quiet goodnights while passing by. She answered each one with the same calm warmth she always had. No bitterness. No performance. Just dignity moving steadily through marble corridors polished enough to reflect the ceiling lights overhead. As she approached the main lobby, Leonard looked up from the security desk and smiled softly. Evening, Judge. Vanessa returned the smile. Good night, Leonard. Through the glass entrance doors, rain shimmered beneath the streetlights outside like liquid gold. Her black Lexus waited near the curb under the covered loading zone. This time, no flashing patrol lights cut through the darkness. No raised voices. No suspicion. Just the quiet rhythm of rain against pavement, and the distant hum of traffic moving through the city beyond the courthouse steps. Vanessa paused briefly near the lobby windows. Across the street, a young black girl stood beneath an umbrella beside her mother, both waiting for the walk signal to change. The little girl glanced toward the courthouse and froze when she recognized Vanessa. Her eyes widened instantly. Then slowly, shyly, she lifted one hand in a small wave. Vanessa smiled and waved back. The child's face lit up so brightly it softened something deep inside the tired marble building behind her. The walk signal changed. The girl disappeared into the rainy crowd holding tightly to her mother's hand. Vanessa stood there for one quiet second longer before continuing toward the exit. The courthouse doors opened with a soft mechanical hiss, and cool evening air drifted across her face carrying the scent of rain and wet concrete. She walked carefully down the stone steps, heels clicking softly beneath the covered entrance. A young clerk rushed forward holding an umbrella, but Vanessa gently shook her head. It is all right, she said. The rain touched her coat lightly as she crossed toward the waiting car. Above the courthouse entrance, carved deep into pale stone weathered by decades of storms and sunlight, the words "equal justice under law" stood silent against the darkening sky. Vanessa glanced at them once before opening the driver's side door. No cameras waited outside now. No reporters. No crowd. Just rain falling steadily across Washington while a woman who had been humiliated in public carried herself home with the same grace she had carried long before anyone finally decided to see it. The door closed softly behind her. Headlights reflected across the wet pavement. And somewhere high above the city, thunder rolled quietly through the clouds before fading into silence.